Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. David Chow. I direct the Center for Asian American Christianity. Today, we're in for a treat as I host a conversation with Professor Paul Lim, who is Associate Professor of the History of Christianity at Vanderbilt. We're going to talk about a lot of things. And to kick us off, I understand that, Paul, your son is a baseball player and that he is college bound. I have a basketball player son who is interested in playing basketball as long as possible. Tell me where your son is at in terms of his baseball trajectory and his education.
Yeah, so thank you, first of all, Dr. Chow, for this invitation to join you in this very, very important and exciting podcast.
Thank you.
And hello to everyone who's tuning in. It's a great delight for me to connect via this particular medium with the supporters of Asian American Center at Princeton Seminary, a place that I used to call home between 95 and 97.
Right.
So
you're an alum.
Yeah, I am an alum. Not the best one, but I own it. And so anyhow, yeah. So let's see. So I was really, I was okay smart, but I myself was quite athletic. Didn't always get the opportunity to do it because my family moved here when I was a junior. Finishing up middle school from South Korea. My parents thought sports ain't gonna get you anything, so don't worry about it. So I went out for the baseball team at Yale as a walk-on back in 1986. Made the JV squad, freshman team, basically. There are so many guys who are trying out, all former high school players who weren't recruited, but they tried out. And that was about a year and a half of very aborted attempt at trying to play collegiate baseball. But I knew that I was good if I had better opportunities. I wondered, what if? And then the Lord allowed us to have one child. His name is Christian, and he's currently a senior in high school, and he is a left-handed pitcher. A couple of weeks ago, we had an MLB scouting director in our living room talking to us about what it might cost or what it might take for our son to forego college attendance. He's currently he's officially admitted to Stanford University as a baseball player for class of 23, and he's really excited about the great opportunity and delight that he has to do that. So I think he's really very excited to go. He has quite a number of friends, both in this year's draft as well as next year's. He has a couple of friends who were first to round draft picks out of high school. So This is a world that he's been kind of swimming in. I guess as I look back, how we started this journey was he was preternaturally athletic. He played football, basketball, baseball, and he swam. And then he narrowed down to football, swimming, and baseball throughout ninth grade. And then after he made a verbal commitment in his beginning of his sophomore year, I think his coaches encouraged him to focus on one sport. So then because he was playing football, but he was playing like cornerback and so on, and you would have to, complete your play with your shoulder, leading with your shoulder, tackling people down or something like that. So, and he's a pitcher, so I think that wouldn't be the best thing to do for your body and for your athletic prospects. So that's where we are, and I think I'm just really excited. I don't think I'm living my life vicariously through him. There are days when I wish that he didn't play, actually, because that way he can go to a school like Stanford and get a great education. But he seems really poised to go and do well. And I think it's like this. It seems to me. I think in basketball, we had, among the Asian American communities, Jeremy Lin was really big, and Insanity and all that. I was at the Madison Square Garden watching him score, I don't know, a bunch of points while that Insanity was actually happening.
Wow.
But that's like few and far between. At NFL, we've had some, Eugene Chung for the Patriots and a few others. There's a kicker for the Falcons, Kuhe Chun, who's doing really well, signed a big contract. So my morning devotions are usually reading scriptures, praying, and then going right to ESPN.com. So I'm a sports junkie, right? So I've always been really interested in how are Asian Americans doing in different arenas of sports.
Yeah.
I think luckily for and thankfully for baseball, I mean, one of the baseball, I mean, one of, if not the best, one of the top, players right now. I guess the hottest one right now is Aaron Judge with 61 home runs, just, tying or eclipsing, Roger Maris's record.
Yep.
But, the other guy is obviously Shohei Ohtani. And so compared to, let's say, Ichiro Suzuki, who's stoic and, people didn't know what he was thinking, but he was a phenomenal player, but somewhat unapproachable. Shohei Ohtani is a goofball. People love him. And I think, there's a sort of a newer generation or this kind of newer era where you don't want to be overly idealistic and, or like over realized eschatology. But at the same time, I do sense somewhat that things are just changing a little bit. So, I mean, Ohtani being two-way guy, great pitcher, great hitter. And my son is pitcher. I mean, he's a left-handed pitcher, but I think he looks at guys like Ohtani, and there's also what is his name? He plays for the Cleveland Guardians. Stephen Kwan, who's a second-generation Chinese American, as I believe, from the Bay Area. And there are several other guys that are, really good. Right now in Christian's class, there are 3 other Asian American guys, not, from Asia, but born here, raised here, who are phenomenal players who may actually skip, college. And so I think, these are pretty interesting times. And so I am excited for my son's journey, and I always have to remind myself and remind him that, you can only be you. So I just tell him usually, remember these 3 letters, you, be you. God has made you uniquely you. You cannot be somebody that you're not. And the moment you start comparing yourself to other people, especially in the arena of sports, you do it all the time. Other people do it for you, right? But then, so you just have to develop a real thick skin in your life journey and just remind yourself that I belong. As the Heidelberg Catechism first question asks, what is your only comfort in life and in death? It is that belonging. So I think especially for high caliber athletes like your son or my son, it's a lonely path. It is incredibly, you're kind of climbing up the stratosphere where there are fewer and fewer people. Then you can only really rely on something and someone bigger than yourself, your family, but above all, the Lord who has created you and loves you and sustains you right now.
That's a good word. That's a really good word. I want to circle back a little bit to the narrative about your son in high school in preparation for college. I was so I play tennis and I follow tennis. I was at the US Open. Whenever there's an Asian American player, I'm kind of always rooting for them. So Brandon Nakashima is an up and coming Japanese American player.
Okay, great.
And he lost against Yannick Sinner, and I was disappointed about that. But I happened to be hitting with a former tennis professional from Taiwan who was ranked on the ATP, and his son is a basketball phenom at my son's high school. And so we were just talking about basketball, high school, college. So here's the question. Did you and your family relocate to a specific school for their baseball program?
Quite the opposite, actually. He goes to a very, very good school. It's a day school, boys' day school. I don't know if you know that movie, Dead Poet Society with Robin Williams. But the person who wrote the screenplay to that went to this school in Nashville, Tennessee. And it's a school that is really, their 3 mottos are gentleman, scholar, athlete. And so athletically, they do well, but they're not known as like an athletic school. They do well, but it's just, and there are different schools in different areas known for different sports. There are definitely baseball schools in the area. My son's school is not one of them. But I think, we really wanted, because we kind of figured that he may be really good, we wanted him to go to a school that would offer the counterpunch or, like counter perspective. And that is real great emphasis on academics. And they are, when I look at the classes he's taking, I'm a historian of early modern Europe, early modern England, Reformation, post-Reformation. So I know that genre and period pretty well. And I'm often amazed at how much he's reading. I mean, he was reading, Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man. And I was just teaching that in my graduate seminar in the study of religion just last week. And so there's a high school student reading this stuff that I'm teaching to a group of doctoral students. Again, so I know I think we talked a lot about that option, because I think for some time our son did want to go to a school where baseball is kind of like king along with football. And but just circumstances did not lead us to, and the Lord did not. I mean, like schools interested in that possibility, and we were also interested, but it just never really ultimately materialized. And I think, again, there are things in my life, the pivot moments where it could have gone this way or that way, but I stayed, or I chose. And you just have to, I think one cannot really live with deep regrets about a lot of things, I think. And so we have zero regrets. I mean, he's really had a terrific time at this school called Montgomery Bell Academy, more popularly known with the acronym of MBA, and he's just had a great time. Yeah. So there are schools in Nashville called BA, Brentwood Academy, or CPA, Christ Presbyterian Academy, and then Montgomery. So you get a BA, and then you get an MBA, and then you become a CPA. So some people say, in terms of your journey, you get an undergrad degree, master's degree, so that you can become a certified public accountant. But that's just all kidding aside. So, but these are the three schools that are really prominent in the area. Private schools that are good at athletics and good at academics. And of the three, I would put my son's school as the top in terms of academic pursuit. And the other two schools would agree that that is the case.
Yeah. So the listener to our podcast may wonder, why the heck are David and Paul talking about education, children, and sports? And that's because these are issues that Asian Americans think about. And so I want to scope out a little bit. This morning, I was just reading this special issue of Vulture magazine. They've got an entire issue on at home in Asian America. And one of the authors, Chu, was talking about the mixed Asian metaphor and looking at the children, especially biracial children of parents. And I just think that talking about our children and the intergenerational framework is a really important component to thinking about Asian America. And so this conversation that we've just had is directly relevant to the broader topic of Asian American life and Asian American Christianity. And so along that theme, something that you and I have been emailing about recently is simply, there are quite a few students, seminary students, folks in their 20s that listen to this podcast. And you and I are a little bit older in age. And so we have some life experience in navigating institutional spaces, in navigating academic life, in reflecting upon our identity as Asian Americans in spaces where we are racialized minorities. And so I want to kind of, for this next part of our conversation, think through what is some of this wisdom that you've gained through life experience in navigating institutional and academic life as a racial minority, as an Asian American, as a Korean American. What kind of advice would you give to your younger self? Maybe that's the question we can open with.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Chow. That's a really a crucial question that opens up into multiple directions of, forays of exploration in terms of how we approach this. I would say that a couple of things, and life is really about relationships, it seems to me. It's, to put it more theologically, as we talked about, you belonging to, not to yourself ultimately, but to Christ, your Savior, who has loved you and given himself up for you. So there is immediate pre-existing relationality the moment we're born into this world. No one can come into this world via autogenesis, right? I mean, you cannot just will yourself into existence. So that means somebody was there prior to your being. So then when I think about my relationships, first of all, it's my family, my parents and siblings. But throughout my life, though, the Lord has been really gracious in giving me some real good friends in life. So just last night, just less than 12 hours ago. I was hanging out with a dear, dear brother who spoke at Belmont University here in Nashville for their chapel. His name is well known to our listeners, Dr. Seung-Chan Ra,
Oh,
prophetic
yes.
lament and next evangelicalism. I've known Seung-Chan since about 2001, when I was just starting my teaching journey at Gordon Conwell Seminary in Boston, and he had just planted a church in Cambridge, Mass. And we were, I think there are types of friendships where you're always trying to kind of one up, the other, and trying to show off like how much smarter you are, or how whatever.
Yes.
And we were really, we were each other's real big fans,
Mm.
and I think so having like a mutual admiration club with your friends. So, and if they happen to be of your particular, I mean, in this case, he and I are both, immigrants from South Korea. I think he
Mm.
came here much earlier than I did. And he and I are, in fact, about the same age, and just a
Mhm.
few months apart.
Yeah.
So that age factor, experience factor, and above all, that sort of a desire to really get excited about each other's journey and be there. I think that really matters a lot. I think, when I was younger, I used to think that it was more about just what I can get done and what I can publish, where I can speak, who I can network with. But it was much more instrumental rather than covenantal and relational.
Mm.
So I would say that, take the time to develop some deep, meaningful friendships that would actually have a long-term consequence. Nashville has changed a lot, but there aren't as many Asian Americans.
Mm.
And, Dr. Rise moved from Chicago to Pasadena, California to teach at Fuller recently. And he and I were talking about, as we are getting not younger, but, hopefully more mature, but, thinking a lot about those significant relationships that really anchor us and sustain us. I would really say that to my younger self. And the other is, um, much more self-consciously than I have, and that is to seek out mentors who get you, right? And that's going to be a challenging thing because unless you are in ministry or in theological spaces, institutions where there are mentors, potential or actual, who get the narrative, the sort of a complicated narrative of Asian American identity, hybridity. I mean, I was seek that out. I mean, I think, for that reason alone, even there are certain schools that I would say, yeah, you should really think about that. I mean, I
Mm.
would name, yours and, certain other spaces, where, that there would be the presence of mentors
Mhm.
who look like you, who have parents and grandparents and family narratives that are not so dissimilar to yours.
Mhm.
That doesn't always mean that they'll immediately get you and want to befriend you and kind of journey with you either, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's perhaps a greater likelihood. And also I found that I was teaching just the other day on and I was sharing with this group of doctoral students. It's all students of color actually this year in this cohort. And I mentioned to them, the first year PhD students at Vanderbilt, and I said to them, look, um, there are two authors, well, three, in fact, whose writings have impacted me tremendously. And they're neither Asian American or Asian, nor are they white or Anglo-European. They're all African Americans. One is W.E.B. Du Bois and his,
Mhm.
the whole double consciousness, and his
Mhm.
essay that was published in the Atlantic about, the whole progress of the African American communities
Mhm.
and the burden of what it means to be seeing yourself through the gaze of the other.
Mm.
And also Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man. When he talks about I'm an invisible man, I told the students, look, there's an immediate resonance there. I know that I feel that in my life, in many ways, I don't have much to complain at all, and I don't have anything to complain. I'm just grateful, but I do feel invisible by myself or by the others. And the other thing is Sean Copeland, this womanist, Catholic theologian who taught at Boston College for a long time, Knowing Jesus Crucified. It's a powerful book that I taught in my class.
Mhm.
I had a privilege of having her join us via Zoom when I was teaching this class on theodicy. And so I was sharing with them, look, it is odd because my area of research and teaching tends to be on a bunch of dead white figures, right?
Yeah.
And yet, and I'm Asian, I'm Korean American, and yet all of those, but the group of scholars and figures who have really influenced me tremendously happen to be from this other group that so we talked about, is that accommodation? I said, it would be accommodation if I just, assume the mantle of being the spokesperson for a community that I'm not actually a part of, but maybe interested in. So, but I said, look, I have the utmost respect for the kind of tutelage that they were able to offer me and the kind of perspective and the lens through which I can see myself. So, in many ways, some of my biggest mentors may not have been Asian Americans, actually.
Yeah.
I think one of my dear, dear brothers who has just retired from Vanderbilt, he's an African-American gentleman scholar that I really look to. And he and I were real good friends and remain good friends, about a decade older. And I think for this friend, his presence in my life, and he is super excited. I mean, we actually lived together for 8 years. So what happened in my part of the journey at Vanderbilt, for 8 years, my family and I lived on the Ingram Commons, where all first year students live. And every freshman class has, they live in these 10 different houses, and each house has a faculty head.
Oh.
So this particular gentleman, Dr. Frank Dobson, and I were faculty heads from the very beginning for 8 years. So he's watched our son grow, and Christian, our son, knows Dr. D, and I would have him come to our house for dinner to talk about why I do what I do, and he would have me do the same. So we just kind of, and he was in fact the first one who introduced me to Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man. And I was also sharing with the group of students, and I hope things are a little different at PTS, but I think for when I was going through school younger, I didn't read Du Bois, I didn't read Ellison, I didn't read, Copeland.
Yeah.
And so the canon needs to be changing, and in the shifting of the canon, who are some of the Asian American perspectives? Whose perspectives do we legitimately bring in as somebody whose narrative is tremendously helpful? Like for me, like one of the persons that I have used as a textbook is Shusaku Endo's book, The Silence.
Yeah.
Silence is, I'll pull it up, this book right here, I think, where is that?
As you look for it, that book was one of the reasons that, Dr. Casey Choi and we are co-teaching our introduction to Asian American theology. In the first day of class, we asked students, some of whom are not Asian, why they're taking the class, and one of the students mentioned Endo's book Silence as a
or the movie version, right? I mean, and that was that really kind of opened up the eyes of a lot of the students. I think I've taught that book for the last 15 years, and so many of them said they would say things like, this is the first time I've read an Asian or Asian American author.
Yeah.
And some would say this is one of the best books that really shaped my thinking about God. I mean, Savior, self, and society. And, so it's, the list goes on. And and there's this other book that, what is that called? Yeah, it's edited by Rita Nakashima Brock.
Oh, Off the Menu. You mentioned
Off the Menu. Yes.
And
it's a tremendous book. And I don't know if Rita or Puilan would be surprised to hear that I'm a big fan of their work. But I think there's all of these kind of potentially maybe it's on me. But it's just that because I do kind of a Western, history of Christianity of the early modern period, I think some people assume that I don't have those interests. I really do, but I just rarely have the kind of opportunity to really hit at it in terms of expressing, admiration. But I just love, first of all, I love that title, Off the Menu. Like, there's some things that are, and I always tell students, even these days, coming up with a syllabus is a political act, right?
Yes.
Some things will be left on the menu, some things will be left off the menu. I mean, seriously, right? I mean, because let's say you're kind of a restaurateur and you're trying to start a new restaurant here in town. You're going to have to think about, okay, do I go Southern? I mean, there's a very, very big time chef in the South. Is a new American kind of cuisine guy. His name is Edward Lee, and he's a Korean American guy from Brooklyn, I think. He
Oh,
does a lot of, pork belly, samgyeopsal, and kind of
yeah.
weaves that into, because, in the South, like a lot of people eat pork belly. I mean, but up
Yeah.
north, I never heard of pork belly, but you come here into the South. I've been here in Nashville for the last 16 years. And so I think there are decisions that one makes, what to include in order to showcase who I am and what kind of future of my restaurant. So I do think that who gets read in schools really tells you a lot about what kind of institution you aspire to be, and you already are.
Yes.
So I think, I have found, that book, and also just Professor Kwak Lan's work as a long time standing scholar in constructive theology, Asian feminist theology, and just all around such a great person. Again,
Absolutely.
I wish I had an opportunity to have gotten to know her better.
Yeah.
I mean, she's now at Emory and I'm at Vanderbilt, but I just really, so it is kind of the incidental details of our institutional context that sometimes make it possible, or our own particular areas of inquiry that may determine with whom I'll hang more. I mean, for example, we have right here Dr. Chun Liang Sia, who used to be at
Yes.
your front yard, backyard, and
Right.
he's been here. And when I was at Princeton Seminary, I mean, just he is such an esteemed figure. I didn't do Hebrew Bible, so I didn't really know him that well. In fact, I don't think I've even had the courage to speak to him.
Yeah.
So maybe if I could talk to my younger self again, I would say, you know what? People are people. We all have to put, our pant legs one leg at a time.
Yeah.
They may be academic superstars, but we're all mortal beings. And so, I think one of the best things to do, I've been telling my students right now this year, if you admire somebody's work, express that gratitude, because scholars are shocked. I mean, I was talking to somebody, I won't name her, but she's a very well-known scholar. And I let her know recently that I really appreciated her work.
Yeah.
And she said to me, I almost never hear that. And that really blew me away. You know what I mean? And so we're all kind of, I don't know about you, but I think a lot of academics, at least myself, I feel like, Rodney Dangerfield, I get no respect around here, and
sure.
so that kind of, and to really express a genuine kind of human to human, especially in our context of COVID-19, just to express our humanity and kind of desire for, just expressing how someone's work has, impacted someone else's life journey.
Yeah.
And so I was telling these graduate students, if you like somebody's work and if you have any questions, don't ask me, ask them, email them. And they may or may not get back to you, but a lot of them do, because I don't know about you, but I am flattered if somebody takes my work seriously. Recently, maybe about 4 or 5 months ago, somebody emailed me asking me about something I wrote 10 years ago from page 242. Like, what did you mean by that? And I was like, whoa, I forgot what I wrote there. So I had to go look it up.
Well, I want to jump into your work.
Yeah, sure, of course, please.
I also want to just kind of touch on the mentorship, the friendship, the mentorships, syllabi, menus as political acts. I think these are all broadly structures that shape kind of our tastes, our values, our orientation. And I just want to give a shout out, as you mentioned, Professor Kwak Lan, Rita Nakashima Brock. These are some of the leaders within Pan Autumn and ATSI, Theological Summer Institute. And I just want to say that if it weren't for the Asian Theological Summer Institute, which is a mentoring program, and I highly recommend it for doctoral students of Asian descent, especially when they're at the proposal stage. That week-long program was really instrumental, because prior to that, I had never been in an intentional Asian or Asian American kind of formation group. And
does it still exist?
It does. It's still.
I've written twice to be part of that as a faculty.
They need to listen to this podcast, and
I know. I hope they're listening. I'm ready to come. I'm ready to come and do whatever I can, because I don't do Asian American discourses. Again, I think this is, like, while we're on the subject, so Charles Long is an African American religious studies scholar who is really big in African American religious studies now. He taught for a long time at U Chicago, and we were reading his book Significations. And a couple of the African-American students in the class said, you know what, this is, and they're all first-year doctoral students. They're like, we've read a lot of, there's a canon of African-American authors and Long gets mentioned, but it's not usually read a lot. And so, and we wonder, and I think it is probably because he taught, the sort of this history of religions kind of trend at U Chicago, which is very Germanic and German influence. And so those African American now is being rediscovered and really kind of, being read into, and re-inscribed into, inscribed for the first time into the African American canon, of religious studies. And I do think that we need to, among Asian Americans, we need to also like broaden the scope of like, okay, who exactly counts as an Asian American scholar, right? And so I think my day-to-day experience has been really like pummeling me into realizing that I'm an Asian American. But then when I applied with things that are Asian American, and to hear that like, no, I mean, I think it's quite frankly, they had limited number of faculty who could do it. And they obviously deemed others to be much better qualified. And I'm glad. I mean, people like, I don't want to, but, Ann Jo is a great example. I think her work is fantastic. Her work on Han has been like, I get it intuitively. And I do think that in my kind of maturation process, I've come to really appreciate deeply the kind of contributions that have made Jin Young Choi at Colgate Rochester Crozer Divinity School, is a dear friend who did her PhD here at Vandy with Fernando Segovia. And she's another really a formidable scholar that's really doing awesome work. So I'm really excited. And I think the Asian American Theological Guild itself is maturing.
Yes.
I think there have been kind of passing of the batons, but also the younger scholars that are coming up. I do wonder about, where will they be placed? I mean, that's a general kind of industry concern. I mean, it's not just peculiar and endemic to Asian American communities, but just, I mean, I for one, usually discourage prospective PhD students from applying. I said, fine, if you cannot do anything else, right? I mean, this is a kind of advice that pastors used to give to these prospective seminarians, like, please don't do this unless you cannot think of anything else that you would rather do with your life. I would say the same thing. I think the kind of long gone are days of the sort of a quote unquote gentleman scholar in Cambridge, England, roaming the halls of the university library, looking at these antiquated books and writing a few things. Those days are long gone. I mean, so I think, just a kind of much more concentrated and strategic counsel that you want to have before you end up applying to schools, like who are some of the scholars? What can I do? I usually tell students, with your PhD, you want to get three things, right? 1, a degree, 2, a job, 3, a book, right? I mean, if you get that trifecta out of your PhD experience, you've done really, really well. Of those, and of the PhD students I've had the privilege and pleasure of training, 2 out of 5 have that, and no, 2 out of 5, and that's really great. But it's not that the other 3 are slackers. No, they're trying there. But, once you hit the ground running, teaching at either secondary schools so that's the other thing, right? It used to be back in the day, whatever that day was, which I've never seen or known, there were times, I suppose, where you could get a job if you came from a very top school. It wasn't that hard. I mean, but now it's like, it's incredibly hard. And so you're going to have to think about how will I don't know, I tell students, even with their dissertation proposals, I said, you know what, will this get you a job? Like when you're applying for a theological school or religious studies departments, or in my case, since I do history, some cases you can do history. I mean, I have a just last PhD student who just finished during COVID. He's got a postdoc in the history department. At a history department, that's great, but like whatever you're like, will this actually get you to be a very competitive applicant? So I think
I want to reserve maybe for a follow-up podcast conversation with you the job market, because the job market is a specific entry point into a broader discussion about the future of theological education, which you
of course, yes.
So I want to like circle back, because I feel like that could be a major conversation with respect to demographic trends of migration of Asian people, especially of the dying of the kind of institutional church, the role of religion in our society. So I want to jump into that maybe for a future one. I want to circle back to various threads you've given our audience, and I want to kind of put a sharper point to it. You've mentioned you're trained as a historian. You read Western church history. However, as a Korean immigrant, grew up in the Korean American church. You understand that experience, and I'm sure you're historicizing it as well, linking it to immigration and racialization. So you occupy this sort of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but perhaps in an ambivalent space where your profession, but your kind of existential experience. I wonder how you navigate that. When I was at APARI, the Asian Pacific American Religion Research Initiative this past July, I was so gratified for that space because I could talk with other administrators who are navigating kind of Asian American studies within the broader school curriculum, navigating their identity as an institutional leader in predominantly white spaces, how to advocate for Asian Americans, but not only Asian Americans. And then perhaps another sort of tension is this whole evangelical mainline thing, because I know you've grown up in evangelical spaces, your work is in mainline spaces. So this is another sort of field of navigation. So I guess the question here is, how do you navigate these various fields institutionally, professionally, existentially? Because my sense is Asian Americans have perhaps unique burdens in these areas because we're not white, we're not black, we don't map onto the evangelical mainline binary cleanly. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Thank you, David. I would say that I try to live by my own counsel, these three letters, UBU. I'm not prescribing my journey to anyone else.
Yep.
I'm just saying that this is me.
Yeah.
So early on in my theological journey as a teacher, and I wrote about it in a book that was published, by a small press. I was talking about this experience that I had of reading Jung Lee's, experience, who taught at Drew University School of Theology, whose theology is far more progressive than I am. But now I think I'm kind of right there. I mean, I kind of know, I intuitively get why he did what he did and all that. Reading his account of after he was finished up with his PhD, he wanted to serve God in ministry at a UMC church in Cleveland, in Ohio. And he was told that, dude like you should be our janitor. And that just like made me cry. And, there's a sort of a deeper connection that was established right there that I knew I didn't know really what to do with. I mean, I say I'm too conservative for my liberal colleagues, and I'm way too liberal for my conservative friends. And that I get to live out every day of my life, every day, because I go to an evangelical church where I am way too liberal for some people. And I teach at a secular university-based divinity school where I am, I think, respected for being a good teacher and a good citizen and a very good scholar. But I think everyone knows that theologically I'm more orthodox. So in some ways, I have ceased looking for kind of life nurturing community there. I mean, I think I'm good colleagues and friends with a number of them, but I don't really expect to find people who get me like Seung-Chan Ra. I mean, Seung-Chan is a progressive evangelical, you know what I mean? Like sojourner type. He speaks in multiple spaces. You see what I mean? And I also realized, you know what, maybe that is I went to biblical seminary for my Master of Divinity degree. And by the end of it, I realized maybe I'm a little bit too scholastically interested or maybe social justice oriented or whatnot. And I go to Princeton Seminary, and I was, harassed for being super conservative. Why'd you come from biblical? And these are, I mean, this is history, so you shouldn't filter these things, by the way. I mean, like this is what makes our shit really exciting, you know.
Yeah.
And because, like this stuff, because when you look at people's like diaries and manuscripts, this is the kind of stuff that they write about, you
This
know.
is
Like,
why I love podcasts. Is
yeah,
this
absolutely, yeah,
kind of informal, personal interaction
yes,
is where
there's a
truth
sense of
really emerges.
ephemerality. Yeah, 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 absolutely. And so, and then because, you know, who's going to dig up that particular moment, like 47 minute, 24 seconds, Lim dropped the S-bomb, you know, like, well, who cares, right?
Well, you know, just to trace some of the narratives. So
Yeah,
you were Yale undergrad.
yeah,
You went to biblical seminary, which
for my
is
MDiv.
right. And for people who don't know, biblical was founded because people there found Westminster Seminary not conservative enough. So they
Right, right.
created a
Yeah,
more biblical seminary called biblical. And
right,
then you went from biblical to the arch enemy of Westminster, which is Princeton Seminary, right?
right, right,
And
right.
then you end up teaching at a kind of a divinity school at a secular research university, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
your own professional narrative is this sort of odd conglomeration of
yes,
institutions, which they all make to some degree they all make sense given that
yeah,
you don't fit these
yes,
prefabricated categories, right?
yes. And there are people like that. You know, there are some scholars I know who are, you know, African Americans or, you know, Africana, and also white Americans whose narratives are complicated. You know, I used to think that I'm so unique, and I realized no, there are plenty of people like me who's grown up Pentecostal or fundamentalist, disavow some of that.
Yeah,
I guess for me, I have disavowed some of evangelical stuff, but
yeah.
not by and large. I mean,
Mm,
to me, I was preaching at our church, a chapel at VDS, Vanderbilt Divinity School Chapel, yesterday, and I was talking about, you know, how it's the 5 words to live by to me are, you know, in Mark 9:25, you know, I believe, help my unbelief, right? It's the father of the spirit possessed, you know, son who tells Jesus, you know, I believe, help my unbelief. You know, there is a certain sense of Christocentrism, the vibrancy of Christocentrism in one's journey that I think is at the core of evangelicalism. I
mm,
mean, I think I'm not talking about the Trumpian political
yeah,
January 6th,
yeah,
all of that, you know, terrifyingly abominable nonsense. But, you know, I'm talking about at the core, encountering the living God through Christ and loving God and loving neighbor, whatever your religion may be,
mm,
and leaving some of those eschatological concerns and commitments entirely up to God. And while I'm here, I'm going to try to embody the gospel. I mean,
yeah,
that's who I am at my core. So,
mm,
you know, I learned that at Biblical, I learned that at Princeton Seminary, I
mm,
learned that at Cambridge University during my PhD, I learned that at Gordon Conwell Seminary for the first 5 years of my professoriate, and then the last 16 years at Vanderbilt. And I
mm,
realized when I look back, there has not been a home, you know, like home, like a perfect home, but
yeah,
then they all been homes. So, you know what I mean? And I think there is, so, you know, and so I do take some genuine comfort in reading, you know, one of the most subversively eschatological texts in the New Testament, Hebrews, you know, the letter
mm,
to the Hebrews, you know, and we're looking for a city that is yet to come. And
mhm,
I do think that, you know, maybe because, you know, I mean, Sung Chan and I were talking about this last night. You know, I was talking to him about double consciousness of the Duboisian sort, and he said, Paul, there's this, and he's written about it apparently, about the triple consciousness
mm,
for, you know, children of immigrants. You don't really identify with the majority culture, namely this kind of white superstructures
mhm,
here in America,
mm,
nor do you really identify with the first generation culture of your immigrant families. I mean,
mhm,
I don't. I mean, I came here at age 15. I'm 55, 40 years into this kind of westernization process, as well as preservation of certain cultural mores of South Korea. I don't know that I fit comfortably in a first generation Korean speaking church. I do
mhm,
not actually,
mhm,
nor do I exactly fit in a white evangelical church either. I'm serving there as a scholar in residence. I love it, but there are levels of dissonance and resonance. I mean, that's there everywhere. You see what I mean? Like, I'm
yeah,
going to Korea at the end of October. I'm really excited to kind of, you know, talk to some of the Korean American leaders and Korean leaders.
hmm,
But I would also feel like, yeah, this is the country of my birth and my family's there, my parents are there, but I still feel like my sister said something really funny. She said to me, when you're in a taxi ride, do not talk much because your accent will give it away that you're not really from there. They may really take you for a ride. Now, this is about 20 years ago, but you see what I mean. I think it's
Yeah,
so I've looked for my home and I couldn't find it. I
yeah,
mean, I do find it in my house,
yeah,
and
yeah,
in my relationship with my wife and our
yeah,
son.
yeah,
But I think when we look for, and this sounds kind of hokey, but it's not, and nor it shouldn't sound pietistic, but if I should not be looking for a complete closure and communion here.
here, yeah,
All earthly communions do open up the vista into something bigger and beyond. It's
yeah,
almost like the sacramental presence of the friends that I have here. They open up the vista and possibility of something bigger and beyond
yeah,
that is only going to be fulfilled and fulfillable in the three persons of God,
yeah.
in the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Interesting, interesting. I That's evocative of my church. I attend a predominantly Asian American church. I found a good one. Um,
Okay, which one is
our
that? May I ask?
It's great. Graceway Presbyterian Church. Pastor David Choi. He's a
Oh
PTS
yeah,
alum.
oh yeah, oh
It's
he's a great
USA.
guy.
Yeah, mostly
Yes,
second gen Asian
I love
American
David.
folks.
Yes, yes. I've
So,
spoken
and
there. Yes.
yeah, he's still there. And our son got confirmed this past Sunday. So it was a
Mm,
really happy occasion. He was
wow.
actually baptized because I wanted him to make a choice for himself. So
Yeah,
we
yeah,
did
yeah.
not we didn't baptize him as an infant against my past Presbyterian pastors. But I go to church because I do feel a sense of belonging at my church. And
Yes.
this is kind of my thoughts about the Asian American church more broadly. And I know as a historian, you're interested uh, in perhaps developing a future project related to the history of the Asian
Yes.
American church. And you and I have talked very briefly about Young Nak Presbyterian
Yeah.
Church in
Yep.
LA that you've done
Yep.
some research in.
Yep.
And this past June, I brought together some folks to jumpstart a more formal conversation in
Hmm.
building a subfield called Asian American Church History.
Oh,
And
that's
so
beautiful. Fantastic.
I
Yeah.
well, thank you. I'd love to hear just your ruminations on um, the the place of developing an Asian American church history discussion, the kind
Yeah.
of research you've done already, but also prospectively.
Yes.
Where do you see in the next 10, 20 years the Asian American church going, given that immigration trends from Asia to the US are kind of flatlining? And so
Yep.
that natural growth we found in first gen churches is not really dependable, at least currently.
Yep.
Um, Assimilation. People like my son doesn't speak Korean or Chinese or have strong memories of any sort with the homeland. What does it mean for their faith as an Asian American Christian moving forward, right? So these are some of the prospective issues, but
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
also interested. I know you're a historian, so I also want to lean into your
Yes.
strengths as a historian, perhaps of Asian American churches.
Yeah. No, thank you. I mean, I think, it would be really a lot of fun to have people like Helen Kim or Tim
Yep,
Seng that I know you had
yep,
invited.
yep.
Have a
And
sort of a
Jane Hong
Zoom
as well.
call.
Yep,
Yeah. Who?
Jane
Who's
Hong as
that?
well.
Oh, yeah, Jane Hong is fantastic.
Yeah,
And also
and
Dwight.
William Yu at Columbia.
William Yu, yeah, at Columbia Seminary. These are really thoughtful, great scholars from whom I've learned a lot. I, you know, um, so I think how to jumpstart a particular discourse. So ethnography has not been a big part of history writing because history writing has always seen itself as talking about people who are no longer with us,
Yep,
that they're kind of artifacts that they bequeath, such as manuscripts or books or actual objects of devotion or piety that would help form the. So I got going on the Young Nak Church project partly because I needed an excuse to go to a place where there are people who look like me more, and also I realized that there wasn't as much done. I thought, well, I mean, wrongly or rightly, I'm not sure, but it's the kind of congregational study or localized kind of study. Okay, like I didn't know who else did what I was interested in doing,
Yep.
and I just kind of, I mean, I was gonna, there is a very, very well-known, well, I think in my book, well-known undervalued sociologist, Byung-got Min at
Yep.
CUNY.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he's done a lot of great sociological work on Korean, Protestant communities or Catholic communities in the New York area. Again, I'm not trained. So at earlier in my journey as a scholar, I had applied and didn't get it, but it was a Mellon New Direction Fellowships. So that'll train people who are just at the cusp of getting tenure to pivot to some new field, and you can kind of become more of a double threat rather than triple threat, I guess, whatever, but I always thought that would be a good way to kind of get at this whole studying these congregational cultures, or like, for example, I am trained as an early modern English historian. That means 17th century England. I am amazed at the kind of troves of literary stuff, like, commonplace notebooks or diaries that these people, maybe so narcissistic, left behind, or like I'm hoping that somebody will read it and study about it in Korean churches. I mean, because I am, to be more particular, I am interested in Korean American Presbyterian. I'm not as interested in Korean Christianity because there's a lot being done on it. But Korean American religiosity or Christianity, not so much. And so I mean, I really should have gone to that thing that you convened, actually, but I was really kind of knee deep with up to my eyeball with my own writing, these Occidental projects, so I couldn't go. I mean, not Occidental College where Jane Hong is, but Occidental as in like just Western stuff. So, but if you ask me, like, why did I become interested in Young Nak? Young Nak is a very prominent church. It actually gets you, if you study Young Nak Presbyterian Church, LA, it gets you back to Young Nak Seoul. So there's already a sort of a trans-Pacific, transnational elements that people like Dr. Helen Kim has done a marvelous job on. But also I was interested in studying the sort of the issues of what happened with people at Young Nak when LA riots happened, what happened with issues of generational kind of baton change, what happens to the sort of a gentrification in the city of LA. And so to get at all of these big topics, you cannot, like, I mean, I don't think it's manageable to do like multi-congregational studies. So I thought, like, why don't I just do a study on this church? I spent about 10 days a couple of years ago interviewing people, but what I came up against right away was that they had they had a leadership conflict, right? Leadership change. So one pastor was unceremoniously kind of forced out, and so it created a real mess. So it was a kind of a shadow congregation that was set up and adversarially. And then I realized, oh man, like, and then I was getting calls from that other church saying, let me tell you the real narrative. And you know what, as a historian, that makes for a hugely interesting historiographical project, because there is a reality. I mean, it's like, how to interpret January 6th, or how to interpret whatever, like the founding of this nation, or just telling the story of Asian American Christianity. Who gets to tell it, winners or losers or people in between, will shape the narrative tremendously. So but I guess for me personally speaking, I need to finish this book on early Enlightenment Christology in England. And then after I put that baby to rest, then I'm going to really jump onto this discourse. And I think it's somewhat foolhardy, because talking about Korean American Protestantism may not get a lot. I think it'll get less publishers interested in my work, that, what I mean, like talking about Enlightenment England. But at the same time, I'll be about 57, 58. And I don't want to, again, trying to live by the three letters, UBU. I mean, I got to do what really gets me interested.
Right.
Yeah. So go ahead, David.
I think that we need more histories of Asian American churches if we want to understand who we are today, right? So absent a history of where we've come, it's hard to figure out who we are today and where we're beginning to head. And as a theologian, as an Asian American theologian, I can't do Asian American theology without some understanding of the faith and practice of these Asian American Christian communities that have already been in existence, right? And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
this is a huge plug for you to pick up that project after you finish the current one. I want to circle back to, you said you're trained as a historian of early modern English
Mhm.
history,
Yep,
religious history,
yep.
and in your field, people leave all sorts of archival material from
Yes,
journals to,
yes.
in Reformation studies, there's a big thing about the consistory in
Yeah,
Geneva
oh yeah,
and
sure,
Basel,
sure.
and,
Yes,
and going through
yes,
the documents
yeah,
meticulously to recreate exactly what's going on back in that
yeah,
period. And I
yeah.
thought you were going to analogize and say, do you find that sort of documentary archival sources, are they are they in existence for building an Asian American church history, or are they not? Is that why you thought turning to ethnography could supplement the deficiencies of the lack of archival materials? This is getting a little nerdy, but we have nerds on
No,
the podcast. So
no,
tell me
absolutely.
more
Yeah,
about
let's
the
start out.
methodological challenges you face.
Yeah, thank you. That's a brilliant question, and that gets right at the heart of the sort of kind of temporary stoppage. Like, oh, okay, maybe because I don't know. I mean, I shouldn't speak so presumptuously, but the kind of Genevan consistorial records may exist. I need to do a better. Again, so I need to. I mean, I know that Young Nak is not. It's KPCA, right? I think it's not PCUSA, it's not PCA. It is a sort of a Korean. So the Korean word will be Tonghap. I think it is in that line. Hapdong is more conservative, like Westminster. Tonghap would be more like Princeton Seminary type, but it's not part of the PCUSA. It wasn't. But so what I need to do is then go to their historical society. There may or may not be a historical society. So I think earlier point that you made, David, about the dwindling number of transoceanic migration from Korea or China, that means that there will be, I don't know whether there will be less. I
Mm,
do think that there will continue to be language specific,
mhm,
Mandarin, Cantonese,
mhm,
Korean, and other Asian variety of Asian language worship services.
mhm.
I do think that um, I'm just as a side note, I tell people, especially nowadays when we do most of our writing via email. So I said, if you want future generations to study your thought and your activities, make sure you download your emails, print them out, leave it somewhere. I mean,
Yeah.
like seriously, like if you don't have such ambitions or laudable desires or whatever, then just forget it. I mean, because unless I'm able to access, this is it, right? I mean, like, so there are lots of these older septo and octogenarian Korean Americans at, Young Nak Church, that unless I actually talk to them individually, and which, I mean, let's say, one day I talked to about 5 people and I
Yeah.
was exhausted,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
then, I mean, how many people can I talk? So I would have to basically do it during my sabbatical where I just live there and talk to, and I think it's a very worthy project. Actually, it is sort of a anthropology of Christianity kind of project that is ethnographically based.
Well,
And
on this
yeah,
point, I
yeah.
just applied for a Louisville Institute research grant on
Hmm.
first generation East Asian American Christians. The oral history project
Oh, wow.
highlights native language interviews. And
Yes.
I had
Oh,
LA
wow.
on my mind. So I might circle back to you and see
Oh, let's do it, brother. Yeah, no,
if we
absolutely. Because
could.
I'm able to conduct interviews in Korean. So I'm bilingual, so it's bicultural. So, but I felt that. So again, as a historian, I know people's biases will come out. I mean, that's part of the beautiful thing about this whole talking to people, because you know, I mean, we have enemies, we have friends, I mean, like consistorial records. Yeah, that's what they're all about. I mean, you think they're talking about some highfalutin Presbyterian theology? Yeah, applied. Yeah, applied. But they're talking about why you're naming your dogs, like why you keep naming your kids like, Dennis, or like there are these kind of prohibited names by the Genevan authorities because you cannot name your kids in the Catholic way anymore. And then, people weren't saying their, like the Lord's Paternoster, so our the Lord's Prayer, and they weren't coming to church. So then the punishment was, go home and say the Lord's Prayer 5 times or something like very, very much more quotidian rather than super disciplinarian, right? So when you learn about the everyday reality of 16th century Geneva, you learn more. And so to me, as a Korean American, what is tragic to me is that this is a Presbyterian church in LA right now. I may be able to find more about life of Presbyterian Reform context in 500 years ago in Switzerland. And so you know what? If you don't, and let me just be very blunt. If you don't have people talking about your shit, like your stuff, it disappears. It disappears. And so I was really grateful for the Jeremy Lin, the movie that came out like a few months ago. I was really excited. I mean, I haven't gotten around to seeing it, but there's a real important kind of aspect to chronicling our human endeavors and our efforts, so that for the sake of posterity, not to be uber narcissistic, but that's what history is, right? History is bequeathing for posterity, or for oneself, the record of one's life journey. And I do think that, David, maybe providentially, this podcast is convincing me to like, okay, let's go do this for real, because I got to put my, put your money where the mouth is, or, practice what you preach. Because, and to be frank, I mean, I felt like people like William Yu and Jane Hong and other, Tim Sang, like they were doing good work. So I was like, maybe I should. And another scholar, Rebecca Kim, Rebecca Kim, at Pepperdine, and she's also in sociology,
and Sharon Kim as well. Rebecca and Sharon do some work together on.
So
very valuable.
Again, I just felt like, as a deeply insecure Korean American guy, I didn't want to try so I always wanted to like travel in a territory where no one's done work. So like what I'm working on, it's kind of been worked on, but I feel really confident. Like when I think about embarking on this project on Young Nak Church, I feel utterly and absolutely like vulnerable, naked, exposed, like an imposter. And if you're approaching 60 years old, you don't want to feel like an imposter. You don't want to start something new. But I also feel like maybe there is a way. And so I'm hoping and praying about how the next phase of my academic journey, which, by the way, by academic, doesn't mean that it's only about scholarly pursuit. It's also about life of faith. I mean, if you're studying a life of a church, how can you not be interested in, or at least like notionally interested in, the life of piety? And so I think, that would be, I think, if I'm granted more sufficient years to embark on a new research project, I think that would be something that, and then I thought, and I'm so glad to hear that you applied for Louisville Institute grant, because I just didn't know. I mean, I thought about applying for some funding through the Korea Foundation, but then the Korea Foundation may look askance at projects that are Christianity based, because they may care more about Buddhism or like whatever. And I was like, so I never really got off the ground, if you know what I mean. Like I was like, because I have all these other projects that would keep me grounded in the sort of a Western church history of 17th and 18th century, Europe. So but then it's not that I don't care about that at all. No, I do care about that. But then this other part, this Young Nak thing, and I think I will really just do it on Young Nak, just like one church, and just write something and then get going. I think, because I do think that, like, for example, if one were to do a book on like Korean American Presbyterianism, that would be a huge thing, right? Because you got to take into like the Princeton Seminary crowd, Westminster Seminary crowd, Trinity, like all over, right? You got to cover. So it's going to be a really Herculean effort. But I think starting small with a mega church in LA might be the way to go about that.
If one of the benefits of this podcast is to rekindle your interest in writing this specific ethnographically oral history kind of historical interpretation of Young Nak, then I will have counted this podcast a success.
Yes.
And Paul, I think that is a fantastic note to conclude our conversation. I also want to flag for a future conversation the role of history in constructing an Asian American identity. I think folks like J. Caspian Kang, in some of his writings, in his book, The Loneliest American, he really complicates this notion that we can even have a coherent conversation about Asian Americans as a group because our histories are just so disparate. And I think it's noticeable that as a historian, you were training your sights on Korean American churches, right? So you weren't making the pan-ethnic move. You were staying within the Korean American lane, so to speak. I want to
Yes,
pick that up for a future. I'm sure I've just provoked your thoughts, but I just want to
you
thank
did,
you
because I was just
for.
looking up. I never heard of a guy named J. Caspian Kang. I was
I
like,
know it's a great
that's a
name.
cool name.
It's a very cool name, and he's a very provocative voice. He's got a great podcast along with some other folks, Tammy Kim, Andy Liu, who was previously on, and Andy Liu is a big Jeremy Lin fan, and Jay and Andy love talking about sports and Asian Americans as well. But we'll save that for another one. Paul,
Let's
thank you
do
so
it.
much for your time and just sharing your wisdom, your experience, and your faith with me and my audience.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's been a great privilege and delight. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm so glad that we could connect.